In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about one posture cue that could potentially cure your sciatic symptoms. Now, I say potentially, and in some respects that's what I mean, because there are more options as to what it could be. So we're going to talk about what could be causing it, and therefore, if we're very specific about what can be causing it, we can then be very specific about how to treat it and how to remedy it. So we're going to cover three bullet points. We're going to talk about the sciatic symptoms. We're going to talk about the sciatic symptoms and the pelvis and how that can influence, and then about how to manage that. And then what we'll finish with is with a practical in the gym where I'll be taking you through some just very sort of simple understandings about what you need to do about managing those symptoms of sciatica. So when it comes to the symptoms of sciatica, now what we do know is that sciatica is where you get pain that goes down the back of the leg. It could be as far as the hamstring, could be into the calf, could be all the way down to the foot, into specific toes as well, which will point us in a certain direction. But what we are going to be covering about today is why is that signal being sent down the back of the leg? Well, it's all to do with the sciatic nerve, as you know. Hence sciatica. Now, the causes or the triggers that we're going to be focusing on are ones that are coming from the nerve roots and essentially the holes that they come out of in the spine, and also regarding a disc bulge, because they, in some respects, they kind of oppose each other. So it's very much what that helps us do. If we have a specific trigger, we can then essentially treat it with a specific cure, if that makes sense. So what we're talking about here, so the holes that come out of the pelvis are known as the foramen, and if there is a narrowing of that gap for a specific reason, then what it can do is it can irritate the nerve and send down a signal down the back of the leg. What we've then got is a disc bulge down here. Now again, if a disc bulge touches the nerve, that again will send a signal down the leg and create pain. So what we've got is we've got pain created down the back of the legs, but from two different causes. So if we are just slapping it with a broad brush and saying you've got sciatica, you need to strengthen your core, you're not going to get the results that you could potentially be getting, because if we can understand the specific cause, we can then treat it with a specific cure, as I've mentioned a couple of times. So what we're going to do in the next slide is talk a little bit more about the pelvis and how it influences these two triggers. We're first going to talk about the foramen, so the hole that the nerve goes out of the spine from and then goes down the leg. So as I've mentioned, this gap, so this is with a vertebra, so there will be a vertebra on top of this one as well, and then you've got the gap through there. Now, when your pelvis goes into an anterior pelvic tilt, so the front of your pelvis goes down and the back of your pelvis goes up, that closes, mechanically closes that gap. So if your pelvis is in that anterior pelvic tilt, then that gap is going to be closed, which is then going to offer a greater risk of the nerve being irritated. So if it is from an anterior pelvic tilt, closing the hole, if you can anteriorly pelvic tilt it and flatten the pelvis off, you're going to open that gap and reduce the signal or reduce the irritation on the sciatic nerve, and then reduce the chance of a signal going down the leg. Then we come on to the opposite one to that. So if we're talking about a disc bulge irritating the nerve, now a disc bulge normally happens at the back of the spine. And how that normally happens is because the front of the spine is being squashed. So it's, if you can imagine, there's like a seed in between my finger and thumb. I push down on the front, it's going to come out the back. So that is essentially how you would describe a disc bulge. Now that's coming about because the pelvis is essentially in a what would be described as a posterior pelvic tilt, so the opposite to the anterior pelvic tilt. So the front in an anterior pelvic tilt is being brought down and the back is coming up. That's in an anterior pelvic tilt. If we talk about a posterior pelvic tilt, it's the other way around. So the back goes down, the front comes up. Now, obviously, what that's doing, that's pressing or reducing the space at the front area of the vertebral disc here, which is then going to be encouraging the disc material to go backwards and potentially irritate the nerve. So now that we understand that, what we can start to do is treat that more specifically by just positioning the pelvis differently. Now, this may not work because it could be because you've got some degeneration to the disc, so you're losing disc height. Now, that will automatically reduce the gap between it or in the foramen. So even positioning the pelvis won't work because there is little height in the disc to be able to regain that gap in the foramen. Also, there could be some foraminal stenosis, so the narrowing of the gap, so more bone is being laid down to narrow that gap. So again, just by opening or closing the gap isn't going to really have a big effect on it. Opening the gap could, but again, the gap is narrowed, so it's going to have a reduced effect. So where this, if it could work, if there is irritation to the nerve from the foramen being closed and you can open it back up and it relieves it, or if there is a disc bulge, which again reposition the pelvis, and that can also manage the irritation to the nerve. But as I mentioned, it may not work because these are only two of many different things that it could be. Now that we've gone through some of the anatomy with regards to the spine and the pelvis of this posture cue, what we're now going to do is bring it to life a little bit and talk a little bit about some everyday activities that it may include. This is a common thing that comes up when I do my online consultations, is people have sciatic symptoms, they have it in very specific postures, and they don't know how to get out of it. So I've got a seat here to replicate the sitting posture, which is a common time when people will start to get pain down their legs. Could be sat in a chair, could be sat in the car. Now, what's happening is, as I've mentioned, we've talked about the gap in which the nerve comes out of the spine becomes narrowed. Now, that becomes narrowed when you overly arch the back. So you basically close those exit holes, as it were, and that can irritate the nerve. If on the flip side it's a disc problem and there's a disc bulge touching the nerve, that would be in a more rounded posture. So what we need to do is we need to find the optimal position between the two. Now, you will decide this based on your pain. There is no set posture. So it could be a neutral spine. There could be a little bit of extra arch there. It could be much flatter. It could even be rounded, but potentially it may not be, but it could be. So it's thinking about all of those different positions and which one works best for you. Now, how you can do that if you're sat in a chair or sat in a car is you can have a cushion. Just have that in behind. The thicker the cushion, the more the arch. So if you've got a small cushion, fold it in half. That's going to create a big arch. If that works for you, then that works for you. If it's a smaller cushion, it might just flatten the back and just create a little bit of an arch. So it's about finding that position that is most suitable for you. So during the online consultations and course, this is something that I will talk to you about. So it might flag up in the initial questionnaire, initial consultation or assessment that number one, you're getting sciatic pain, how long is it taking to come on, where are you when it's coming on, so on and so forth. So all that flags up. Then we would talk about something like this. The other scenario is you've got sciatic type symptoms. I then give you an exercise which is a decompression of the spine, which can help just alleviate some of the pressure through, or not through the nerve, but on the nerve. But what can happen is you may not be performing it quite correctly. So one activity is where you would sort of hold on to a door or a door frame or whatever it may be, and you just sort of lean back on your arm and just let your hips sort of work their way towards the floor. So there's not a great deal of weight going on the legs. Now, what you may find is that that's actually creating more pain. And again, it could be the same scenario as if you were sat down. So it's the fact that you're coming into this position and you're rounded. So what you might need to do is just come into a slightly better position, just arch the back ever so slightly or come into a neutral posture, and it clears the pain or it reduces the pain. So you've got the benefits of the decompression and you've just changed the posture so you're not irritating the nerve either by the disc being irritated or irritating the nerve, or the gaps where the nerves come out, they're irritating the nerve. Now, this is to say, this might not be specific to your lower back pain, but what it is doing is giving you the idea of changing the position of your pelvis to help change the position of your spine, to help reduce the irritation on the nerve, albeit from a disc or from the irritation of the nerve roots as they come out of the spine. So it's something to be mindful of. These two examples that I've given here aren't a one-size-fits-all. It's got to be very specific to your lower back pain, but the principle can hold in that if there is some irritation from a disc or some irritation from the exit holes from the spine, then there can be, this posture can help you reduce that pain. However, there are other things that could be involved in doing it, and these two are a little bit null and void. So try this, see what it's like. If you want to book an initial consultation and come on the course, then please do just click the link below, go through, and I'll be happy to help. So that's Chris from Chris for Whole Training. I hope to see you on the online course and coaching.